Detective Alex Ryder didn't believe in ghosts, but the city of Cedar Creek believed in something. It clung to the old town like Spanish moss, something ancient and ugly that the shiny new police academy brochures never mentioned. Alex was a clean slate officer, transfer from a bigger city, divorced, trying to outrun a desk job that suffocated him more than any adrenaline rush. Cedar Creek PD put him on the night shift, specifically patrol in the industrial dead zone, a forgotten sprawl of warehouses and condemned factories. His first week was routine: junkies, busted windows, and the suffocating silence of a town that slept too deeply. That ended on a Tuesday night. The call came in at 3:17 a.m. Disruptive noise, possible break-in, at the old Blackwood Sawmill. The mill had been abandoned since the 1970s, locally infamous for an industrial accident where 5 workers vanished without a trace, supposedly vaporized in a boiler explosion, though no remains were ever fully recovered. Alex and his partner, Officer Dana Vance, a local woman whose eyes held a permanent weariness, pulled up to a vast, skeletal building. The silence here was different, thick, humming, like a pressure cooker about to blow. "I've been past this place 1,000 times, Vance muttered, checking her sidearm. "Never heard a peep." The front door was splintered, a fresh break. Inside, the air was cold, even for late October. The familiar scents of rust and decay were undercut by something else, a metallic tang that made Alex think of old pennies and fresh blood. They cleared the ground floor, navigating through enormous, dust-shrouded machines that looked like sleeping metal beasts. No one. Just the echo of their boots and the faint drip-drip of condensation. The source of the disruptive noise remained elusive until they reached the back corner, near the old boiler room access. It was a hole in the concrete floor. Not a manhole, not a pipe, just a crudely smashed opening, maybe 3 feet across, leading down into absolute blackness. Beside it lay a ruined sledgehammer, its handle splintered. "Someone worked hard for that," Alex said, shining his light down. The beam vanished after only a few feet. "Hello? Police. We know you're down there." Only silence answered. Vance knelt, her face grim. "Look." She pointed to the edge of the jagged concrete. Embedded in the grit was a single, tiny splash of something thick and dark. Not red enough for arterial blood, but definitely biological. "Okay," Alex sighed, his adrenaline kicking in, that cold, focused buzz that always felt like a shot of high-proof whiskey. "Vance, you stay up top, cover the main exit." "I'm taking a look." "Ryder, that's a structural nightmare. Call it in." "Wait for backup," she insisted, her voice tight. "And let a perp crawl through the sewers." "No. I'll be fast. If you hear anything other than my voice, you shoot first, call later." Alex descended, the air immediately turning clammy and cold. The smell intensified down here, not just blood, but something musky, like stale earth and wet dog. When his boots hit the floor, he realized it wasn't a sewage line or a storage crawlspace. It was a corridor, crude, low-ceilinged, and lit by a single, flickering bare bulb far down the tunnel. The corridor walls weren't concrete, they were smooth, cold steel. It looked like the hallway of a repurposed, rusted ship, not the basement of a timber mill. He crept forward, gun raised. The air grew progressively warmer, the metallic scent overpowering. As he got closer to the light, he saw it. The corridor ended at a large, heavy door. It wasn't the usual mill-issue fire door. This one was smooth, obsidian black, and had no visible hinges or handle. It was just a seamless slab of black metal in the middle of a rusted steel wall. Above the door, illuminated by the bare bulb, a single word was crudely scrawled in a dried, dark substance that Alex now knew was blood. "Third." Alex stopped, his heart slamming against his ribs. He felt a profound, chilling wrongness. This wasn't a break-in. This was something else. He raised his radio, his voice a strained whisper. "Vance, I'm in the basement. I've found a corridor, looks like a bunker or a sublevel. There's a door. It's not right. I'm going to." Suddenly, the air in the corridor shifted. The humming pressure intensified, and the floor vibrated with a deep, resonant thrum. The single light bulb above the black door exploded, plunging the corridor into darkness. Then, from behind the seamless black slab of the door, a noise began. It was a slow, wet, deliberate scraping. Like a heavy, blunt fingernail being dragged across the steel, followed by a sound that made Alex freeze, a wet, guttural sigh, deep and impossibly close, like something very large and very hungry had just woken up. On the radio, Vance's voice was a desperate shriek. "Alex! Get out! There's a shadow, it's not moving like a person, Alex, it's..." The radio went silent. Not static. Silent. Alex was alone, in the dark, with the heavy, wet thump of something approaching the other side of the black door. He fumbled for his small tactical flashlight, training the narrow beam on the bloody inscription. Third. He backed up slowly, his senses screaming for him to run. He felt the need to see the outside, to understand what Vance had seen. As he reached the opening in the floor, he shone his light upwards. The beam caught the empty ground floor of the mill, and there, hanging upside down from a splintered roof beam, was Vance's police-issue utility belt. Its empty holster swung slowly, casting a long, unnerving shadow in the gloom. Alex heard the scraping from the black door again, closer now, louder. He looked down the hole, then back up at the swinging empty holster. He made a choice he knew was insane. He didn't run. He had to know what the third was, and he had to find Vance. He dropped his flashlight, letting it shatter on the concrete floor, drew his gun, and plunged back into the dark corridor, turning his back on the escape route. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the terrible, wet thump behind the seamless black slab. Alex plunged back into the dark steel corridor, the metallic tang in the air now thick with the scent of fear, his own. He moved low, his feet silent on the cold metal floor. His decision to stay was born of instinct and the brutal reality of the swinging, empty holster. Vance was gone, and whatever took her was likely still nearby. He retreated perhaps 50 feet, finding a deep shadow where the corridor briefly narrowed. The scraping noise from the black door had stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound that he slowly brought his radio back up, whispering into the mic, hoping Vance had just dropped hers, hoping for static, for anything. "Vance, report. Vance, do you copy? What did you see?" "Only dead air." He pressed the emergency button, a silent distress signal to Cedar Creek PD. It was a 15-minute response time, minimum. He was completely alone. He waited, his muscles coiled, gun steady. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He forced his mind to focus, running through procedure, assess, contain, report. Assessment was terrifying. Containment was impossible. Reporting was done. Then, from the direction of the shattered hole in the floor, he heard it, a faint, almost mechanical click-click-click. It sounded like a badly maintained toy soldier marching on concrete. Alex peered around the narrow corner. A light appeared, not his flashlight, but a small, focused beam bobbing erratically. It was an old man. He was rail-thin, dressed in layers of rags and what looked like a tattered fisherman's coat. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, and his eyes, when the light briefly swept over them, were wide and strangely clear, like polished glass. He carried a battered, antique lantern that cast an unsettling, oily yellow glow. The man stepped into the steel corridor, his eyes darting frantically from side to side, missing Alex entirely in the shadows. Alex slowly lowered his weapon, recognizing the type, a local hermit, maybe a former mill worker, or a known squatter. Hey! Stop right there. Police. Alex's voice, though firm, cracked in the cold air. The old man froze, dropping his lantern with a clatter. It didn't go out. He raised his hands, shaking violently. I didn't do nothing, officer. I just came for the pickins. I swear. Don't take me back there, please, he pleaded, his voice a dry rasp. Whoa, easy. I'm not arresting you. What are you doing down here? What were you picking? Alex kept his distance, watching the man's hands. The old man, still trembling, gestured vaguely toward the black door, his eyes wide with stark terror. The tokens. They leave the tokens out for the first watch. I just needed one, officer. Just one to keep it quiet for the night. Tokens? Quiet? What are you talking about? Did you break the hole in the floor? Did you hear a woman scream? Alex pressed. The old man started weeping silently, tears carving clean paths down his dusty cheeks. No scream, officer. No scream at all. That's the part that gets ya. The third door don't allow no noise. Just the sigh. He pointed a gnarled finger toward the black slab. She took your friend. She's the gatekeeper. You don't make a sound when the gatekeeper has ya. It's the rules. Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. The third door. Gatekeeper. Who are you? What is this place? My name is Elias. I used to run the night boiler, 50 years ago. This ain't no mill basement, officer. This is what they sealed up. This is the anomalous storage wing, Elias rasped, leaning in conspiratorially. It runs beneath the whole town, built by the ones who owned the mill before Blackwood. They were keepers. Keepers of what? Alex demanded, stepping closer. Elias's eyes darted past Alex's shoulder, up towards the ceiling. The rooms. The first door, the second door, the third door, they hold the things that Cedar Creek sleeps on top of. Things that need to be fed so they don't wake up the whole town. Your friend, she went through the third door. That's the holding room. Alex swallowed hard, trying to reconcile the sight of the steel corridor and the old man's insane ramblings with the empty holster upstairs. And the tokens? What do they do? They keep the first watch away from the doors, Elias mumbled, finally picking up his lantern. See? I found a good one tonight. He fumbled in his coat pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object. Alex leaned in to see. It wasn't a coin or a trinket. It was a single, perfect human molar, polished clean, drilled through the root, and threaded onto a frayed piece of twine. Before Alex could react, a terrible, tearing sound ripped through the silence from behind the black slab of the third door. The sound was high-pitched, like metal flexing and tearing under impossible pressure. Craakkkkk. A hairline crack appeared across the smooth black surface of the third door, directly beneath the bloody inscription. Elias let out a high, thin wail of pure terror. She's angry. She heard us talking. The third door doesn't like noise. The scraping resumed, this time frantic, wet, and powerful, as if something large was clawing at the inside of the door. The single crack widened, and a thin, grayish smoke, smelling intensely of ozone and decay, began to seep out. Quick! Get out! If she opens the third door, the first watch will come for the noise. Elias screamed, dropping his molar on a string and scrambling back toward the hole in the floor like a terrified crab. Alex looked at the widening crack, the noxious smoke, and the bloody word third. He then looked at the retreating figure of the only witness that he raised his gun, not at the old man, but at the door. Tell me how to open it, Elias. Tell me how to get her out, he yelled over the sound of the cracking metal. Elias didn't stop, his voice echoing back in a frantic cry, "You don't open the third door, officer. You feed it. Only the tokens will quiet it. You have to find the second watch." And then, Elias was gone, clambering up the hole and disappearing into the silence of the mill floor above. Alex was alone again, the black door now visibly bowing inward, a sliver of impossible blackness showing through the expanding crack. Next, the tokens of quiet. The steel corridor was vibrating violently now. The crack in the seamless black door was nearly an inch wide, and the gray, acrid smoke pouring out was stinging Alex's eyes and throat. The sounds from inside were a cacophony of scraping, wet slapping, and a low, rhythmic thump-thump that felt more like a heartbeat than a sound. Alex had two options: follow the terrified Elias out, or face the thing that had just abducted his partner. The empty molar on the floor, the token, crystallized his choice. This was no longer a police matter, it was a rescue. He holstered his weapon and ripped the radio off his shoulder strap, silencing the chance of static or an accidental transmission that might further enrage whatever was behind the door. He was going silent. He snatched the molar on a string from the floor. It was still slick with moisture and warm to the touch. Elias had called it a token to keep the first watch away and said the gatekeeper needed to be fed. Alex needed information, and Elias was the only source. He scrambled to the hole in the floor and pulled himself up into the cavernous, silent mill floor. "Elias! Where are you?" Alex hissed into the gloom. Silence. The air up here was colder, cleaner, but the metallic, coppery scent of the basement was clinging to him. He moved quickly, flashlight beams sweeping across the rusty machinery. Then he saw him. Elias was hunched in the corner of the boiler room, rocking back and forth, muttering to himself, clutching a piece of jagged metal like a shield. Alex knelt down, keeping his voice low and steady. "Elias, I'm not going to hurt you. My partner, Vance, she's behind that door. What is the first watch? What happens if that door opens?" Elias's eyes, wide and manic, focused on Alex. He reached out a trembling hand and pointed to the token dangling from Alex's fingers. "The first watch are the ones who patrol the tunnels. They hear the noise and they come. They find the noise and take it to the doors. Vance was noise. You are noise, officer." He shuddered violently. "If the third door opens, it means the gatekeeper is coming out. And she is hungry for more than just tokens." Alex felt a cold dread settle deep in his stomach. "Okay. Elias, listen to me. You said I need to find the second watch. Where is it? Who are they?" Elias looked genuinely confused, then his eyes cleared with a frightening clarity. "They're not people, officer. The watches are the safeguards. The keepers built them. The second watch is down the west tunnel. Not the steel one. The stone one. It's old. It's got the carvings. The west tunnel. Where does it start?" Alex demanded. Elias pointed a shaking finger at a massive, rusted steel plate embedded in the mill's concrete floor, half hidden beneath a mountain of coal dust. "Under the old coal chute. It's the way the keepers got to the other doors. But you gotta hurry. That gray smoke, it means she's almost ready to move." Alex slapped the old man gently on the shoulder. "Stay here. Stay quiet. If you see the gray smoke, you run." He sprinted across the floor to the coal chute. The steel plate was enormous, secured by 4 heavy, antiquated bolts, their heads thick with rust. Alex grabbed a wrench from a nearby workbench and began struggling with the first bolt. It squeaked and groaned, the sound agonizingly loud in the mill's silence. Screech. Clink. The first bolt broke free, down below, from the mouth of the hole leading to the third door, a trickle of the oily gray smoke began to curl out, drifting towards the ceiling. Screech. Clink. The second bolt. Alex could hear the rhythmic thump-thump from the basement now, louder, resonant enough to slightly shake the floor beneath his boots. It was close. Screech. Crack. The third bolt snapped. Alex pulled on the fourth bolt. It wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, straining every muscle. His vision tunneled. Suddenly, a wet, guttural snarl echoed up from the basement hole. Not a human sound, but primal, powerful, and absolutely furious. The gray smoke intensified, billowing out like a small geyser. Alex let out a yell of effort, putting all his weight into the wrench. The fourth bolt finally ripped through the rotting concrete with a shower of sparks and pulverized rock that he kicked the steel plate. It groaned and slid slightly, revealing a narrow set of crumbling stone steps leading down into absolute, heavy darkness. The air rising from this hole was stale, dusty, and thankfully, cold, unlike the humid, metallic heat coming from the third door's corridor. Alex grabbed his flashlight, turning back only for a moment. Elias was gone. The corner where he had been was empty. Only the shattered metal he'd been clutching remained. Damn it, Elias, Alex swore under his breath that he spared one last look at the gaping hole leading to the third door. The rhythmic thump-thump was so loud now it felt like a vibration in his chest. And then, he saw it, through the rising gray smoke, briefly illuminated by the meager light spilling from the main mill floor, a flash of motion near the hole. It was a single, long, pale finger, impossibly thin and segmented, its nail black and cracked, resting on the concrete edge, feeling for purchase. Alex didn't wait. He plunged down the stone steps into the west tunnel, kicking the heavy steel plate back into place as he descended, sealing himself in. The clank of the metal plate hitting the floor above him was deafening that he was in total darkness, surrounded by the smell of ancient dust and dry stone. He turned on his light, revealing a tunnel much older than the steel corridor, uneven stones carved with strange, shallow symbols that seemed to writhe in the beam of his light. He was looking for the second watch. As he moved deeper, he heard a new sound, faint at first, then growing louder, echoing off the stone walls, a slow, measured chant. It was rhythmic, deep, and sounded like dozens of voices speaking in unison, but in a language Alex couldn't place that he was walking into a choir of the dead. The stone tunnel smelled like grave dust and ozone, a dry, brittle cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of Alex's bones. The chanting grew louder with every step, a low, resonant sound, like the deep hum of an enormous, ancient engine, but composed of human voices. It wasn't a song, or a prayer, but a slow, rhythmic recitation in a language that felt physically heavy, pressing against his eardrums. Alex kept his flashlight low, sweeping the beam over the carved symbols Elias had mentioned. They weren't graffiti, they were deep, deliberate glyphs etched into the stone. They looked like diagrams of the nervous system mixed with astrological charts, all lines, circles, and jagged points, radiating out from a central, repeated symbol, 3 downward-pointing chevrons that he rounded a bend and stopped dead. The tunnel opened into a large, circular chamber. The chanting was deafening here, vibrating the very air. In the center of the chamber stood the second watch. It wasn't a device or a person. It was a structure, made entirely of tightly bound, blackened wood and bone, shaped like a massive, skeletal wind chime. Dozens of small, desiccated human skulls hung from the beams, their eye sockets dark and vacant. The chanting wasn't coming from the structure, but from a source Alex couldn't immediately identify. Then he saw the source of the light. Embedded in the wall opposite him were a series of narrow, vertical slits, too small to be windows, but through them, a sickly, pulsing violet light emanated. And this light was projecting the second watch's security system. Dozens of human figures, barely illuminated, stood perfectly still against the curved stone walls. They were the chanters. They looked like men and women, clad in stained, colorless robes, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They stood shoulder to shoulder in a complete circle around the chamber, arms hanging loose at their sides, their bodies utterly motionless except for the slight, unnerving movement of their mouths as they continued the relentless, deep-throated chant. Alex realized he had stumbled upon a grotesque ritual. The watch wasn't a guard, it was a choir, creating a sonic barrier that he had to get closer. He needed to find whatever Elias meant by the second watch being a safeguard, and if it could somehow neutralize the gatekeeper at the third door. That he moved cautiously along the edge of the chamber, his flashlight beam carefully dimmed. The chanters didn't react. Their glazed eyes remained fixed on the skeletal chimes in the center. As he moved past the violet slits, he saw a narrow, rusted metal door, almost perfectly hidden between two robed figures. It looked different from the seamless black door. This one had an ancient, complicated lock that he pressed against the stone wall, trying to reach the door without touching the robed figure beside him. He noticed something else about the chanters. Their skin, where it was visible beneath the hoods, was paper-thin and pulled tight over their bones, like ancient parchment. They didn't seem to breathe. As Alex reached for the doorknob, the robed figure closest to him, a man whose height was disturbing, slightly shifted. The chanting didn't break rhythm. The man's head slowly, unnaturally tilted, and Alex saw that his neck was completely rigid. Then, from beneath the shadow of the hood, a voice, still part of the deep, collective chant, but slightly louder, clearer, spoke in perfect, unaccented English. The gatekeeper has claimed the noise. Noise is forbidden here, Officer Ryder. Alex froze. Officer Ryder. How did it know his name? He whipped his gun up, aiming for the chanter's head, but the creature was already moving. It didn't step, it slid, effortlessly gliding toward him. Its hand shot out from beneath the robe. It was impossibly long, the fingers skeletal and ending in hardened, polished bone, not nails. Alex fired. Blam! The gunshot was deafening, momentarily shattering the rhythm of the chant. The bullet slammed into the figure's chest, but instead of blood, a shower of fine, dried coal dust erupted from the robes. The figure barely staggered. You brought silence to the first one, the voice from the hood said, now devoid of the chanting rhythm, sounding flat and mechanized. The keeper is almost satisfied. The creature lunged. Alex sidestepped, slamming his body into the rusted metal door, forcing it open just enough to slip inside. That he barely made it. The chanter's hand scraped against the metal frame, leaving 3 deep, perfectly straight gouges in the thick steel. Alex spun, slamming the door shut. He fumbled for the latch, realizing there was no lock on the inside. He grabbed a heavy metal pipe lying nearby and wedged it under the handles. That he leaned against the door, gasping for breath, the faint, persistent sound of the chanting resuming on the other side. His eyes swept the new room. It was small, cold, and dimly lit by a single, green-tinged emergency light. It was a maintenance locker, but everything was covered in a bizarre, reddish-brown residue. In the center of the room, bolted to the floor, was a heavy, steel-cased console, ancient, covered in dials and gauges marked with the same cryptic chevron symbols as the tunnel walls. This was it. The control for the second watch. Below the console, a small, leather-bound journal lay open. Alex snatched it up. The handwriting was faded, precise, and dated 1974, the year the mill shut down. He opened it to the last entry, frantically scanning the page. The third is unstable. The gatekeeper is demanding a constant energy drain. If the chanting stops, the keeper is released. The only way to silence her is to activate the frequency nullifier. It reverses the watch's output, creating a barrier of absolute silence, a null field, around the third door. The switch is marked with the 3 chevrons. But the power reserves are low. We can only hold it for 10 minutes. If the null field fails, the keeper will take control of the first watch. The mill must be sealed. We have failed. Alex looked at the console. The main switch was a massive, sparking lever labeled with the 3 chevrons. Next to it, a small dial with a red light indicated the power level, 10:00. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the massive lever. With a grinding, electric scream, the console surged to life. The green light in the room flickered. On the other side of the bolted door, the deep, resonant chanting immediately ceased. Absolute, terrifying silence replaced it. Alex knew that silence meant 2 things: the null field was active around the 3rd door. And the chanters of the 2nd watch were now fully awake and coming for him. The silence that descended upon the chamber was not peaceful, it was a pressurized, suffocating void. The abrupt cessation of the hypnotic chant was instantly replaced by a violent, frantic scrabbling on the other side of the bolted door. The chanters of the 2nd watch were now fully aware and clearly enraged. Alex kept his weight against the pipe-wedged door, his eyes glued to the console's timer. The red digits glowed aggressively, 9:55. He had 10 minutes of absolute silence surrounding the 3rd door. 10 minutes to get back there, open it, find Vance, and escape, all before the gatekeeper and the 1st watch were unleashed upon the town. He looked around the small maintenance room. The console was roaring, venting steam and hot, ozone-smelling air. This was the only place he knew of the null field was active. He couldn't risk the chanters breaking through. With a final check of his pipe wedge, Alex grabbed the molar token and the journal. He needed to find another way out of the 2nd watch room. He spotted a set of small, steel rungs leading up into a dark, narrow shaft above the console. A maintenance access, likely leading up to the mill's ground floor, possibly near the old coal chute. He scrambled onto the rungs just as the rusted steel door shuddered violently under a massive impact. The pipe wedge groaned, bending slightly. Time to go, Alex muttered, climbing fast. He ascended into the darkness, the faint sounds of heavy impact on the door growing weaker beneath him. After about 30 feet of vertical climb, his head bumped into something cold and metallic. He pushed. A small, rusty hatch groaned open, revealing a sliver of light and the unmistakable smell of dry industrial dust. He found himself inside a dusty storage closet, completely separate from the 2nd watch chamber. He pushed open the closet door and stepped out onto the familiar concrete floor of the mill. He was near the rear wall, close to the boiler room. The air in the mill was thick with residual gray smoke that had curled up from the basement hole earlier. But now, there was only the low hum of the null field, a high-frequency whine that was just at the edge of human hearing. Alex moved quickly back toward the smashed hole in the floor. He glanced at his wrist. 8:30. He reached the hole. He looked down into the steel corridor. Everything was dark, silent, and still. The oppressive, metallic heat was gone, replaced by a deep, unnatural cold. The null field was working. He dropped down the remaining distance. His light swept the corridor. He raced toward the black door, his heart hammering in a confusing mix of terror and relief. The bloody inscription, 3rd, was still visible. The widening crack in the door, which had been spewing smoke and noise, was now completely sealed by a shimmering, invisible field, like clear plastic stretched tight. The crack was still there, but nothing could pass through it. Alex pressed his ear to the field. He heard nothing. Not the scraping, not the sighing, not the thump-thump. Absolute silence. He pulled out the journal, finding the page he needed. The null field creates a pressurized vacuum of non-sound. Anything attempting to exit will be held in stasis. To open the door, a specific key is required to temporarily depressurize the field. Below the door, there are 3 small, recessed indentations. Each accepts one of the 3 required tokens: the tooth, the watchman's offering, the eye, the seer's payment, and the bone, the keeper's fee. Alex looked down. Sure enough, beneath the smooth black door, right above the floor, were 3 small, dark indentations, barely visible in the dark. He had the first token, the tooth, Elias's molar. He frantically inserted the molar into the left indentation. It clicked into place with a sickening finality. The timer in his head screamed 7:00. Now, he needed the eye and the bone. He looked around the dead silent corridor. There were no other rooms, no side passages. Only the third door and the tunnel back to the mill. He noticed the bloody inscription again. Third. He shined his light higher, along the smooth steel walls of the corridor. Just past where the light had exploded, he saw it, faintly etched into the wall, covered by grime, a crudely drawn map. It showed the steel corridor, the third door, and then two short side tunnels, one marked second, and one marked first. The keepers used tokens to move between the doors. Alex had a sudden, terrible realization. The only source of the tokens would be the people who were already lost to the mill. He looked at the map again. The side tunnel marked first was directly opposite the third door. He ran. He found it immediately, a heavy, bolted maintenance panel that blended perfectly with the steel wall. He kicked it repeatedly. It wouldn't budge. He remembered the wrench he'd used on the bolts upstairs, but he couldn't go back now that he'd pulled his gun and fired a round into the panel's central seam. Blam. The sound of the gunshot in the enclosed steel space was deafening, a violation of the null field silence, even if it was localized. He kicked again. The panel popped open, revealing a narrow, dust-choked tunnel. Above the opening, the word first was crudely painted. Alex slipped inside. The tunnel was short, maybe 20 feet, and ended in another seamless steel door, identical to the third door, but marked with a single, massive bloody eye. Lying on the floor in front of the first door, discarded like a piece of refuse, was a long, pale ulna bone, a human forearm bone, cleanly snapped at both ends, polished smooth. The keeper's fee. The bone. Alex snatched it up. He felt a sudden, profound shift in the air behind him. He turned. Standing at the mouth of the first tunnel, blocking his only exit, was Elias, but this wasn't the trembling old hermit. Elias's eyes were now wide and bloodshot, fixed on Alex with ravenous intensity. His skin was tight, his mouth slightly ajar, revealing a mouthful of jagged, filed teeth. He was no longer dressed in rags, but in a long, tattered, black robe. He was the first watch. You take the tokens, Elias's voice hissed, dry and furious, no longer frail, but powerful and echoing. The keeper is mine, noisemaker. You feed the door, and the door feeds us. Elias lunged, his long, bone-tipped fingers reaching for the molar token dangling from Alex's neck. Elias, now clearly revealed as the terrifying first watch, moved with a speed that belied his frail appearance. His eyes were wide and focused on the molar token Alex held. Alex reacted instantly. He dropped low, dodging the rake of those bone-tipped fingers, which sliced through the air inches from his face. He didn't have time to shoot, the noise might compromise the null field or summon the other watchers. He slammed his body into the creature, driving it backward out of the narrow first tunnel and into the main steel corridor. Elias hit the ground with a dry, dusty thump, but immediately scrambled back up, his face a mask of primal hunger. The quiet is almost done. Elias snarled, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that cut through the strained silence. The keeper will have the noise. Alex sidestepped another lunge and thrust the sharp end of the ulna bone, the bone token, into Elias's torso. Instead of resistance, the bone sank into the creature's body with a sickly squelch. Elias emitted a high-pitched, inhuman shriek, a dry, whistling sound that somehow managed to be loud without breaking the atmospheric silence. Elias stumbled back, clutching the wound, which was not bleeding, but leaking a thin, black, oily powder. He looked utterly shocked and betrayed. The keeper's fee, used on the watch, he wheezed. No. It is for the door. Alex didn't wait. He drove the molar, the tooth, into Elias's shoulder, and used the small, leather-bound journal, the only non-metallic thing he had, to slap the creature across the face, momentarily blinding it with a cloud of dust. This bought him a critical 30 seconds. The timer in his head was screaming 5:45. He broke away from the skirmish, sprinting back toward the third door. Elias, staggering and leaking black dust, began to give chase, moving in a jerky, unnatural gait. Alex reached the third door. He quickly shoved the newly acquired ulna bone, the bone token, into the middle indentation. It clicked securely into place. Now, he needed the eye, the seer's payment. That he glanced down the corridor. Elias was gaining on him, his ragged black robe billowing behind him. Alex knew he was running out of time and options. He focused on the bloody inscription, third. The map in his mind showed only one remaining door, the second door, located in the chamber with the chanters. That he pulled the pipe he'd used to wedge the door in the second watch room out of his belt, the only makeshift weapon he had left. That he took off running, back down the steel corridor, toward the opening in the floor, ignoring the enraged, dry snarls of Elias closing in behind him. That he scrambled up the hole and onto the mill floor. For $50. He didn't hesitate. He raced across the vast, shadowed floor toward the spot where he had sealed the maintenance hatch leading to the second watch chamber. He reached the hatch, pulling it open. Before he could descend, a dry, heavy object slammed into his back. Elias had followed him. The creature wrapped its long, dry fingers around Alex's neck, not squeezing, but pressing, attempting to silence him. The door opens for the keeper. Elias rasped. You will be the final fee. Alex brought the pipe up and swung backward, slamming the heavy steel against Elias's head with a dull clang. Elias staggered back, a piece of what looked like dried scalp tearing away, revealing smooth, yellowish bone beneath. The injury seemed to only infuriate the first watch. It shrieked again, a terrifying, dry whistle, and lunged. Alex ducked, dropping into the open hatch. He used his momentum to pull the heavy hatch cover down just as Elias's hand shot into the opening. The heavy steel hatch clanged shut on Elias's forearm. The creature screamed, a sound that finally shattered the forced silence of the mill floor. A dark fluid, thicker than blood, burst from the crushed arm. Alex slid down the maintenance chute, landing hard on the floor of the second watch room. The chanting room was still silent, the null field still holding the chanters in stasis. But the door he had wedged was now groaning, the wood splintering. The sounds of the enraged chanters tearing it apart audible and horrifyingly close. 3:30. That he scrambled over to the console, its humming a welcome sound. He scanned the room, looking for anything that could be the eye. The chanters had been standing in a circle, their faces hooded, illuminated by the violet light that pulsed from the narrow slits in the wall. He went to the slits. He pushed his eye up to one of them, looking through. The violet light was searing, burning his retina. He blinked rapidly, adjusting. The narrow opening gave him a view into a small, adjacent, concrete room. It was starkly empty except for a large, white ceramic sink, chipped and stained with the reddish-brown residue that was everywhere, and floating in the water of the sink, slowly bobbing, was a single, milky-white human eye. It looked unnervingly fresh, preserved in the cold water. The seer's payment. The eye, the sound of the door finally giving way behind him was a horrifying crack followed by the immediate return of the deep, thunderous chant. The null field had failed, the chanters were active. Alex looked from the eye in the sink to the console timer, 3 o'clock. He was trapped. The chanting of the second watch was back, crashing over Alex like a physical wave. The sound was immediately louder, deeper, and more aggressive than before, filling the small console room with terrifying resonance. The broken maintenance door was no longer splintering, it was being torn open. Robed figures began spilling into the room, their movements not the gliding slide of Elias, but a frantic, jerky scuttle, their mouths fixed in silent, synchronized chanting. Alex realized the null field hadn't just stopped the chanting, it had contained the chanters. Now they were freed. He had 3 o'clock minutes on the console, but the timer was now irrelevant. The null field had shut down, its energy reserves depleted in the final surge. He was in a room full of furious, dust-leaking creatures. Alex looked at the violet slit leading to the sink. The eye was right there. He didn't have time to find a tool. He slammed his shoulder against the wall, aiming for the thin concrete between the metal casing of the slit and the doorframe. The impact sent a painful jolt up his arm, but it created a hairline fracture in the dried concrete. The first chanting figure reached him. Its long, skeletal fingers wrapped around his forearm, the grip impossibly cold and strong. Alex yelled, a raw sound of pain, and twisted his arm, simultaneously driving his elbow backward into the creature's chest. The dry fabric of the robe ripped, and the creature stumbled, momentarily breaking the focus of the unified chant. He punched the fracture point repeatedly, ignoring the burning cold on his arm. The concrete gave way with a sickening crunch. He reached through the jagged opening, his fingers finding the cool ceramic of the sink and the cold water. He plunged his hand into the water, his fingers scraping against the bottom of the sink before finding the soft, slick orb. The eye. He pulled his arm back, tearing his skin on the broken concrete. The milky white eye, complete with a severed optic nerve dangling like a thread, was clutched in his bleeding hand. The seer's payment. The chanters converged. One grabbed his leg, pulling. Another pressed a hard, hooded face toward his own, the relentless, deep chant rumbling just inches from his ear. Alex had his gun out, but firing would only bring the authorities he was trying to protect from this horror. He had to escape, quietly, now that he swung the heavy metal pipe he was carrying, using it like a baseball bat. The pipe connected with the side of one of the robed figures with a wet, heavy thud. The creature crumpled, emitting a cloud of black dust and falling into the sink with a splash. The chanting wavered. Alex seized the opportunity. He vaulted onto the console, grabbing the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. He aimed the nozzle at the faces of the remaining chanters and pulled the lever. A blast of white, acrid chemical foam erupted, coating the robed figures. The cold shock and blinding foam momentarily disorganized them. The chant dissolved into a series of sputtering coughs and frustrated snarls. Alex jumped off the console and scrambled toward the maintenance chute he had used to enter. He didn't climb, he slid, ignoring the ripping of his clothes and the stinging cuts on his arm. He landed hard on the dusty concrete of the mill floor. He scrambled out of the small hatch, kicking the hatch cover back into place just as the first robed hand punched through from below. He was back on the main mill floor. He was cut, bleeding, and terrified, but he had all three tokens, the tooth, the bone, and the eye. He glanced at the gaping hole leading to the steel corridor. Elias was gone, leaving only a dark, sticky trail where his crushed arm had been. Alex ran, plunging back down into the steel corridor. 1:45, this was Alex's internal clock of how long it took to get the tokens. He had to move faster. He reached the third door. The shimmering, invisible null field was still active, somehow holding steady even after the console was breached. It hummed faintly, a last gasp of engineered silence. Alex pushed the eye into the final indentation. The three tokens, the molar, the ulna bone, and the eye, clicked into place. The shimmering field around the crack of the third door vanished. The metal slab was instantly engulfed in a sickening, humid heat, and the sounds returned. The wet, deliberate scraping was back, louder than ever. The rhythmic thump-thump of the gatekeeper's heart, or footsteps, was vibrating the entire corridor, but now, a final element was introduced. From the crack, Alex heard a muffled, low, and terrified sound, Vance's voice. "Alex. I can't move. It's heavy, Alex. It smells like copper and rust. It's touching me." The sound of her voice was immediately cut off by a sharp, terrible shush from within the door. Alex looked at the door. There was no handle. He pulled out the journal again, frantically scanning the page. Once all tokens are inserted, the field collapses. To fully open the door, a final, direct energy application is required. The lock mechanism is designed to accept a direct, high-voltage electrical current through the token array. Only a specific energy frequency will work. Alex cursed. He had no battery pack, no cables, no high-voltage source. He had a police-issue Glock and a flashlight that he looked at the door, then at his gun. The tokens were now acting like conductors, forming a circuit beneath the door. Alex made a reckless, desperate gamble. He placed the muzzle of his Glock right against the central token, the bone, the Ona bone. He knew that the explosive energy of the gunshot might be the direct energy application the keepers had mentioned. If he was wrong, the gun could blow up in his face, or the shrapnel could be enough to completely destroy the door, releasing whatever was inside instantly. He took a deep breath, aimed directly at the Ona bone, and pulled the trigger. Blam! The confined space amplified the sound to a skull-splitting level. The metal casing of the token shrieked as the bullet's force transferred directly into the lock mechanism. The black door didn't explode. It hissed, groaned, and with a heavy, grinding whir, the seamless slab of black metal began to slide inward, revealing the oppressive, humid darkness of the room within. Alex stared into the void, his gun still smoking. He could see a shape now, something impossibly large, dark, and still, hunched over something small and light, and then, a new sound came from the depths of the mill above. The siren. The slow, insistent, wailing siren of Cedar Creek PD, backup had arrived. The wail of the approaching Cedar Creek sirens was the most terrifying sound Alex had heard all night. Not because of the noise itself, but because it meant that in moments, uniformed officers, innocent, unprepared, and loud, would breach the mill. And noise was the gatekeeper's catalyst. The black slab of the third door had fully retracted into the wall. The room it revealed was not a room at all, but a massive, hemispherical space with walls that curved upward into blackness. The air was thick and wet, tasting intensely of ozone and old blood. In the center of the space, hunched over a low, rectangular metal slab, was the gatekeeper. It wasn't a monstrous beast, but something worse, a grotesque parody of the human form. It was immense, easily 10 feet tall when standing, but now curled over. Its skin was translucent, pale, and wet, stretched taut over a frame of impossibly long, thin bones. Its head was small and smooth, with no discernible features other than a vast, perpetually open mouth lined with rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth that seemed to perpetually twitch. The gatekeeper was still. It had the stillness of a predator that knows its prey is trapped, and beneath the immense creature, partially hidden by its translucent limbs, was Officer Vance. She was lying on the cold metal slab, conscious, but struggling feebly against what was holding her down, a thick, dark, rubbery substance that seemed to be oozing from the slab itself. "Vance! I'm getting you out!" Alex screamed, stepping into the humid void, his gun raised. His voice broke the stillness. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The gatekeeper reacted. It did not move quickly, it unfurled. Its enormous, jointed limbs stretched, its back rising with a cracking sound like dry timber. It didn't look at Alex. Its blank face remained focused entirely on Vance. A deep, rumbling sigh filled the air, the sound Elias had mentioned. It was a sound of profound, patient satisfaction. "You brought the noise," the gatekeeper's mouth whispered, a voice like silk wrapped around gravel. It did not move its lips, the sound seemed to generate from deep within its chest cavity. "The keeper is hungry for the noise." The creature finally moved its head, turning its featureless face toward Alex. "You are a generous fee, Officer Ryder." Alex fired 3 quick, controlled shots, aiming for the center mass of the pale torso. Blam. Blam. Blam, The round slammed into the translucent skin. Instead of penetrating, the skin seemed to absorb the impact, rippling like disturbed water. The creature didn't bleed, it merely shuddered, and then, impossibly, the bullet holes began to seal shut, leaving behind faint, temporary bruises. The creature raised one of its long, six-jointed hands, and pointed a finger, even longer and thinner than Elias's, at the retracted door. "The first watch hears the offering," the keeper hissed. "It will come for the source." Alex saw a fresh wave of gray, acrid smoke begin to curl out of the third door's threshold, a clear sign the noise from his gunfire was drawing the watch that he had to get Vance out and close the door. That he sprinted forward, diving beneath the sweeping arm of the gatekeeper. He hit the metal slab next to Vance. "Alex! It's binding me. It's in the metal." Vance gasped, her eyes wide with terror. The dark substance was thick around her torso and legs. "Hold on." Alex pulled out his tactical knife and began hacking at the rubbery substance. It was tough, like cutting old vulcanized rubber. The gatekeeper reared back, finally enraged, its thin limbs shaking. The sight of Alex touching its meal was the last straw. It opened its mouth wider, a truly vast chasm of tiny teeth, and began to descend upon them. "The keeper will silence the offering," the voice resonated. Alex glanced up. He saw a final, desperate option. Bolted to the ceiling, high above the gatekeeper, was a network of thick, sparking power lines, the original mill's main power distribution. They looked wet with condensation that he had to distract it. That he drove his knife, not at the bindings, but into the metal slab beneath Vance. He sliced the metal as deeply as he could, tracing a wide, shallow circle around her body. The keeper shrieked, a high, wet sound. The metal slab was clearly part of its feeding mechanism. The shriek bought Alex a crucial second. He grabbed Vance under the arms and pulled. The bindings tore away from her uniform with a disgusting, sucking noise. She was free. "Run. Get to the corridor. Close the door." Alex yelled, pushing her toward the opening. Vance, limping and visibly shaking from shock, scrambled out of the chamber and into the steel corridor. Alex, however, turned back. The sirens were closer now, a chorus of approaching doom. The first watch would be seconds away. That he ran to the center of the chamber, directly under the sparking power lines, and pulled the remaining heavy metal pipe from his belt. The gatekeeper turned to face him, its immense shadow swallowing him whole. "I am the noise, you pale freak," Alex spat, knowing this was his last stand. That he vaulted onto a small metal scaffolding and swung the pipe up, striking the wet, sparking power lines above the keeper's head. Kzzzzzzzzzzzt, a massive surge of electricity erupted. The gatekeeper was enveloped in a blinding flash of white light and ozone. The current grounded itself through the massive creature, passing through its wet, translucent skin. The keeper did not scream. It simply collapsed, a heap of immense, pale flesh and bone, onto the metal slab with a sound like a ship hitting the shore. Smoke, not gray, but thick and yellow, began to pour off its body. Alex didn't wait to see if it was dead. He dropped, grabbing his knife. That he sprinted back to the open door, grabbing the lever mechanism he'd exposed with the gunshot. "Vance. Now." Vance was already on the far side of the entrance. She pulled on the external frame. Alex threw his weight against the internal mechanism. With a final, terrible grinding noise, the black slab of the third door slid back into place, sealing the gatekeeper and its dark chamber into absolute, humid silence. Just as the door sealed, Alex saw them, a flurry of black rags and dried skin, the first watch, spilling over the lip of the basement hole and racing down the corridor toward the newly sealed door. They were too late. Alex and Vance were safe, but they were trapped in the corridor. Between the sealed third door and the incoming Cedar Creek PD. The moment the black slab of the third door sealed, the atmosphere in the steel corridor shifted violently. The humid heat was immediately replaced by a profound, chilling cold. The three tokens, the tooth, the bone, and the eye, were still embedded in the array, now glowing with a faint, internal crimson light, acting as the new primary lock. Alex and Vance stumbled away from the door, coughing from the surge of yellow electrical smoke that had briefly escaped. The sirens. Vance choked out, leaning heavily on Alex, her body trembling with shock. They're right overhead. We have maybe 30 seconds before they're down here. Alex looked down the corridor. The first watch, the group of black-robed figures led by the recovering Elias, had stopped dead in their tracks 20 feet away. They were huddled, facing the sealed third door, their heads tilted in collective confusion and fury. They recognized the silence. "They're waiting," Alex whispered, dragging Vance toward the hole leading up to the mill floor. "They know the noise is coming for them." Vance stopped him, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Alex, look at the door." Alex turned. The faint crimson light of the tokens pulsed. But just above the lock array, the bloody inscription "Third" was beginning to change. The dried, dark substance was slowly seeping, stretching and rearranging itself across the smooth black metal. The word "Third" dissolved, and in its place, a new inscription was slowly forming, written in the same thick, dark fluid: "The quiet is paid. The witness is free." The first watch emitted a collective, mournful sound, a long, dry whistle of utter defeat. They turned their backs on the door and began shuffling back up the corridor toward the hole, their black robes blending into the gloom. "They're retreating." "The watch is done," Alex observed, relief washing over him, quickly followed by the crushing weight of reality. "Come on. We have to call this in." He helped Vance climb the wreckage of the floor opening and followed her up onto the main mill floor. The air was clearer here, but the wail of the sirens was now deafening. Just as they cleared the hole, the main entrance of the Blackwood Mill burst open. Flashlights blazed into the darkness, casting long, fractured shadows. "Police. Hands where I can see them," a voice barked. .5 uniformed officers, including Sergeant Dale Riggs, Alex's superior, a gruff man who believed only in paperwork and donuts, rushed in, shotguns and pistols drawn. Riggs immediately targeted the two figures near the back boiler room. "Ryder. Vance. What in God's name is going on here? We got your distress signal, and the noise complaints are through the roof." Riggs yelled, lowering his weapon slightly as he recognized their uniforms. Vance, pale and limping, managed to speak first. "Sergeant, we were ambushed. There's an illegal tunnel system below the mill. We found a body. And a group of trespassers who attacked us. We managed to subdue them." Alex nodded, his mind racing to construct a narrative that was terrifyingly close to the truth, yet entirely plausible to a court and a police board. "The trespassers fled into the tunnels, Sergeant. They were wearing dark robes. And we've got a seriously injured civilian down there, an old squatter. And the main issue, there's a massive, unauthorized, and unstable structure built beneath the mill." Alex emphasized the technical terms. Riggs looked skeptical, shining his light into the hole. "Tunnels. Structure. Ryder, you got blood on your shirt and you look like you wrestled a truck. Where's the body?" Alex pointed down the corridor. "It's a heavily damaged woman, Sergeant. Uniformed. We need EMTs down there and hazmat. It's an environmental contamination zone. I'm telling you, this whole basement is a public safety hazard." Riggs looked at Vance, who nodded fiercely, lending credibility to the outlandish claim. "Right," Riggs sighed, pulling out his radio. "We'll secure the immediate area. I want a perimeter. EMTs to the scene. I need specialized extraction gear. And I want the media kept off this for now. Vance, you and Ryder are taking the lead on this. Start with the formal report. As Riggs turned away, barking orders into his radio, Alex looked back down the hole. The shadows had deepened, but he saw them, the first watch, moving slowly and silently, making their way toward the main entrance, avoiding the floodlights. They were escaping, unnoticed, blending back into the dark corners of Cedar Creek. Alex and Vance were brought out of the mill. They were hosed down, treated by the EMTs. Vance's lacerations and bindings were severe, Alex's cuts were minor, and then immediately taken to the precinct for debriefing. Riggs kept the media entirely focused on the structural collapse and the unstable mine shafts, avoiding any mention of the subterranean structure. Alex and Vance stuck to the script. They found an illegal squatting operation led by a cult, they fought off the robbed assailants, and they found the seriously injured civilian. The only physical evidence Alex retained was the small, leather-bound journal. He slipped it into his locker before the official search. The next morning, Alex was back at the station, filling out his report. The official verdict on the Blackwood Mill basement was unstable subterranean structure. Highly contaminated. Sealed indefinitely by emergency decree. They blasted the tunnels and sealed both the boiler room access and the coal chute hatch with 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Alex looked at his pristine, official report, a masterful work of legal, strategic lies. It mentioned no tokens, no gatekeeper, no chanters, and no terrifying, smooth-skinned creature. Vance walked over to his desk, looking much better, though still wearing the permanent shadow of what they had seen. They found the old man, Elias, Vance whispered, leaning close. Outside the mill, near the creek. Died of a massive heart attack. They're calling it exposure. He was the first watch, Alex whispered back. He was escaping. Vance nodded. They also found the injured civilian in the basement. They were able to extract her remains. But they can't identify her. She's been down there for decades. The medical examiner said her uniform looked vintage, from the 70s. She wasn't just a body, Alex. She was wearing a Cedar Creek PD uniform. Alex stared at his partner. 1970s, the same year the mill shut down and 5 workers vanished. The keepers didn't just seal up the mill, Alex said, looking down at the bloody handprint on his jacket. They sealed up one of our own. He opened his locker and pulled out the journal. He placed it on the desk between them, flipping to the final, frantic entry. There's one thing in this journal that doesn't fit the cult story, Vance. It mentions the 3 doors, but it also mentions the 4th door. The precinct hummed with the routine exhaustion of the night shift cleanup, a stark contrast to the subterranean nightmare they had endured. Alex and Vance sat hunched over the dusty, blood-splattered journal on Alex's desk, its pages smelling faintly of metallic ozone and the mill's decay. A Cedar Creek officer, Vance murmured, running a finger over the crisp edge of the report detailing the unknown remains. Sealed up in 74. She wasn't an industrial accident. She was a sacrifice, Alex. A forgotten token. Alex was already flipping through the journal, ignoring the pain in his arm. He found the page detailing the 4th door near the beginning, written in the same meticulous, paranoid script as the final entry. The system is redundant. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd doors are merely holding cells and noise dampers. They contain the localized anomalies and neutralize the sonic pressure. But the greatest danger is what lies behind the 4th door. The keepers fear the 4th, for it contains the origin, the reason the anomalies appeared in Cedar Creek. If the 4th is breached, no amount of tokens or null fields can stop the full awakening. The origin, Alex repeated, his voice low. So the gatekeeper, the chanters, the tokens, they're all just side effects. A containment system for something much older and bigger. And where is it? Vance asked, looking nervously toward the station's front window, where the first hint of sickly dawn was appearing. Alex looked back at the journal, pointing to a rough, hand-drawn map scrawled on the margin next to the text. It was a crude sketch of the mill, the boiler room, and the 3 subterranean corridors they had found, all leading away from the mill's foundation. But a fourth, much longer line was drawn, extending far past the mill property. The journal says the keepers built the 3 doors for stability, but the 4th door existed before them. It says it's not beneath the mill. It's beneath the source of their power. Alex traced the line on the map. The line runs right under the Cedar Creek hydroelectric dam. Vance's eyes widened. The dam? It was built in the late 1800s. It provides power to the whole district. But, why there? The journal mentions power often. High voltage current, energy frequency. The gatekeeper's lock was designed to accept electrical discharge. The chanter's room was powered by a pulsing violet light. This whole system runs on electricity, and the dam is the only thing that could power something this vast and hidden. Alex slammed the journal shut. Riggs sealed the mill. That means the watch can't get back to their doors, but we can't get back down either. The problem isn't contained, Vance. It's displaced. And the first watch is loose. Suddenly, Sergeant Riggs appeared at Alex's desk, holding a crumpled printout. His face was gray, the exhaustion on his features replaced by a genuine, sickened fear. Ryder, Vance. Another call came in 10 minutes ago. We got a report from a night watchman at the hydroelectric dam. What did he see, Sergeant? Alex asked, his hand instinctively resting near his sidearm. He didn't see anything, Ryder. He heard it. He said he heard a screaming. Not a human scream, but a metal one. And then, the power grid dipped for 10 seconds. The entire sector flickered. Riggs lowered his voice, leaning in. But listen to this. The watchman says when the power came back, he saw something else. Riggs pointed a shaking finger at the report. He said he saw a group of robed figures standing on the service road, near the main spillway. And they were carrying something large and heavy. Something that looked like a black slab. Alex and Vance exchanged a look of cold, shared horror. The 3rd door, Vance breathed. They moved it. They must have hauled it out through one of the underground feeder tunnels connected to the mill before the place was sealed. Alex finished the thought for her. They moved the gatekeeper. And the only reason they would move the gatekeeper is if they were taking her to the origin, the 4th door. Riggs looked from their pale, horrified faces to the crumpled report. What are you talking about, Ryder? Black slab? Robed figures? Alex knew he couldn't hide the truth anymore, not with the sirens wailing near the dam. Sergeant, we didn't subdue the trespassers. We only contained one of their prisons. That unstable structure is a containment system designed to lock down an entity beneath the dam. The trespassers, they're a cult, the keepers of quiet, and they just relocated their biggest weapon right next to the power source that keeps their nightmare alive. If that entity, the gatekeeper, touches the 4th door, the containment fails. Riggs was utterly speechless, staring at them like they had lost their minds. We need a warrant for the dam, Sergeant. We need to go in now, with breaching gear, before they open that 4th door, Alex insisted. You're not going anywhere, Ryder. You're under investigation. This is insane. No, Sergeant, Alex countered, looking him straight in the eye. It's the truth. And if you don't believe me, call the dam. Tell them to check the deepest access tunnels. Tell them to look for the 3 chevrons. Riggs hesitated, his career hanging in the balance, weighed against the chilling certainty in Alex's eyes. He picked up his radio, his hand shaking. Before he could speak, the station lights flickered, dipping for a heart-stopping 2 seconds. When they flared back, the phones on every desk began ringing simultaneously, shrieking in unison. Riggs dropped the radio. What the hell was that? Vance, who was looking out the window, pointed a trembling finger down the street. Sergeant, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing phones. Look at the power station. The streetlights, they just went out. The sudden, chaotic shriek of all the precinct telephones, combined with the power dip and the failure of the streetlights outside the window, snapped Sergeant Riggs into terrified action. The chilling conviction in Alex and Vance's eyes finally overcame his skepticism. The dam, Riggs choked out, grabbing his keys. Ryder, Vance, forget the reports. Get breaching gear and thermal imaging. We're going in. I'll handle the official cover story later. Just tell me what we're looking for, fast. The 4th door, Alex said, grabbing his tactical bag. And the black slab, the 3rd door. They'll be trying to connect them. They need the power from the dam to breach the final lock. They need a conduit. Within minutes, Alex, Vance, and a handful of the most reliable, and terrified, officers were speeding through the partially darkened streets of Cedar Creek toward the hydroelectric facility. The hydroelectric dam was a formidable, brutalist structure, a massive wall of concrete and humming turbines, holding back the vast reservoir. As they approached, the facility was completely dark, save for the eerie, pulsing red flash of emergency lights. They found the main entrance gate ripped open, the small guard shack empty. Spread out, secure the perimeter. No firing unless absolutely necessary, we don't want to destabilize the grid. Riggs barked, his voice tight. Alex and Vance went straight for the deepest maintenance shaft, the area closest to the water line, where the pressure would be highest. They knew the keepers would seek the ultimate power source. They descended several flights of cold, echoing stairs, the air becoming thick with the damp, metallic scent of rushing water and high-voltage electricity. The silence here was different from the mill. It was the heavy silence of contained energy. They reached the lowest level, the turbine control room. The room was vast, dominated by 3 colossal generators and a central bank of sparking, ancient relays. The light was provided by the red emergency strobes, which cast their shadows into manic, lunging shapes, and in the center of the control room, the keepers of quiet were working. About a dozen figures in black robes, including Elias, who now moved with an unnerving, rigid precision, his wounds seemingly sealed, were gathered around a horrifying tableau. The massive, seamless black slab of the 3rd door was propped up against the main control bank, directly wired into the high-tension junction box. Thick, insulated cables, clearly ripped from the dam's power supply, ran from the black slab to the floor, and on the floor, beneath the 3rd door's bloody inscription, 3rd, was a circular depression carved into the concrete, about 5 feet across. The floor here was smooth, obsidian black rock, distinct from the surrounding concrete. This was the 4th door. It was a seamless, circular lock, and it was waiting. Elias was supervising the final connection, his voice a dry, hissing command in their unknown language. They're preparing the conduit. Alex hissed into his radio. Riggs, they're wiring the 3rd door into the power supply. They're using the gatekeeper as a conductor. The moment Alex spoke, Elias spun around. His bone-tipped fingers pointed directly at Alex and Vance. The noise. It followed the keeper. Elias snarled. Silence the noise. The keeper's fee is due. The chanters nearest them surged forward. Vance, keep them off the controls. I have to break the circuit. Alex ordered, pulling out his heavy bolt cutters. Vance drew her pistol and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Blam, the sound deafening in the metal room, echoing the reckless energy Alex had used earlier. The shot did not deter the chanters, it spurred them on. They closed in, their movements jerky and rapid. Alex ignored them, running toward the main junction box where the black slab was connected. Elias saw his intent and lunged, his long arm snaking out, catching Alex's ankle. Alex crashed to the concrete floor, his head slamming into the cold surface. He was momentarily stunned, the chaotic chanting of the remaining watch members drowning out all other sound. Elias towered over him, his face a mask of furious, dry triumph. The noise will feed the origin. You pay the final price, Officer Ryder. Alex scrambled backward, bringing the bolt cutters up in defense. Just then, Vance, holding off two chanters with her own pipe wedge and pistol, screamed, Alex. The timer. Alex looked past Elias. On the smooth, black surface of the fourth door, a series of glowing blue lights had activated, a complex circuit array, and in the center, a digital readout had begun counting down, powered by the dam's energy. 01:30. They had 90 seconds before the final lock was breached. Elias grabbed the cutters from Alex, twisting the heavy tool and tossing it across the room. He reached for Alex's throat. Alex, desperate, rolled backward, grabbing a handful of thick, dry dust from the floor, the residue left behind by the collapsing gatekeeper and the chanters' former bodies. He hurled it directly into Elias's eyes. Elias shrieked, a sound of agony. Momentarily blinded, Alex scrambled to his feet. He ran to the nearest generator, its casing humming with restrained power. He had to overload the circuit, cut the power, and break the connection to the black slab. He grabbed a heavy steel bar lying nearby and smashed it repeatedly into the emergency power cutoff panel. Sparks flew, the air crackling with ozone. 00:45. He succeeded. With a tremendous, metallic scream, the main turbine ground to a halt. The emergency lights instantly flickered and died. The entire room plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The chanting stopped instantly. The black-robed figures froze, mid-lunge, utterly paralyzed by the lack of ambient light and power. Their containment system relied on constant energy. Alex's tactical flashlight immediately flickered on. He shone the beam onto the fourth door. The countdown timer was gone. The blue lights were dark, but the third door, the black slab, was still connected. And from behind it, in the absolute darkness, the heavy, wet thump-thump of the gatekeeper's heartbeat began again, slow, deliberate, and entirely immune to the power outage. And in the silence, from the smooth, seamless circle of the fourth door, a new sound began, a quiet, high-pitched whine, rapidly escalating in frequency, like a tea kettle about to burst. The sudden silence and darkness paralyzed the chanters, but it did nothing to slow the horror unfolding at the fourth door. The high-pitched whine from the obsidian circle intensified, rapidly climbing the scale until it became an agonizing, physical pressure on Alex's eardrums. The rhythmic thump-thump of the gatekeeper's heart from the third door's slab was now syncing with the whine from the fourth door, creating a terrifying, asymmetrical pulse. Alex and Vance were momentarily safe from the frozen keepers, but they were standing between two active conduits of something infinitely worse. Vance, armed with a flashlight and a newfound, desperate courage, grabbed Alex's arm. The connection. We have to sever the black slab from the fourth door. Alex looked at the frozen figure of Elias, still blinded by the dust, and the heavy bolt cutters lying 20 feet away. There was no time that he focused his flashlight on the connection point, the thick, exposed wires running from the third door's lock array down to the fourth door's surface. He pulled out the only non-conductive object he had left, the heavy, leather-bound journal. We need to create a physical break. Alex yelled over the piercing whine that he launched himself toward the third door slab, grabbing the nearest heavy-duty fuse box cover. He slammed it down onto the thickest wire connecting the slabs. Zzz crack. A shower of blinding, orange-white sparks erupted as the cover partially severed the cable. The whine momentarily stuttered, dropping half an octave, but immediately resumed, louder than before. The pressure from the sound was now unbearable. Alex felt his inner ear screaming. He glanced at the chanters. Their bodies were beginning to smoke faintly from the sheer sonic pressure, but they remained fixed in place. Vance was beside him, using her police baton to strike the second thick cable. The baton snapped with a sickening crack, but the cable held. "It's too strong!" Vance screamed, her voice barely audible. Alex looked at the third door. The tokens, the tooth, the bone, the eye, were still glowing crimson. He remembered the journal's final warning: if the null field fails, the keeper will take control of the first watch. The null field had failed. The keeper was the conduit that he had one final, desperate option. Alex grabbed the heavy steel bar he had used to smash the generator. Ignoring the piercing whine, he drove the end of the bar into the lock array of the third door, right between the three glowing tokens, intentionally short-circuiting the entire locking mechanism. Kaboom! The blast was immediate and blinding. The crimson light of the tokens detonated in a flash of white-hot energy. The black slab of the third door surged, shaking violently, and the rhythmic thump-thump suddenly spiked into a rapid, frantic tremor. The gatekeeper had been violently interrupted. The connection to the fourth door snapped entirely. The piercing whine from the fourth door vanished. The terrible, physical pressure immediately dissipated. The silence was instantaneous, profound, and healing. Alex collapsed, his ears ringing, his eyes temporarily blind from the flash. Vance, shielded by Alex's body, immediately scanned the room with her flashlight. The chanters, the first watch, were no longer paralyzed. Their robes were smoking, their dust bodies shuddering, but they were beginning to move, twitching back toward the center of the room. "Alex! They're waking up. We need to get out!" Vance yelled, dragging him by the collar. Alex blinked rapidly, regaining his vision. He focused on the obsidian surface of the fourth door. The surface was completely black again, smooth and seamless, with no trace of the blue lights or the digital timer. The breach had been stopped, but as they backed away, the single beam of Vance's flashlight caught one final detail on the fourth door. The obsidian surface wasn't entirely smoothed in the center of the black circle. A single, minuscule bubble was forming. It looked like an imperfection in the rock, slowly expanding. And within that bubble, for a split second, Alex saw something utterly impossible: a brief, crystalline flash of what looked like stars. A pinprick of pure, cold, endless void. Then, the bubble popped. The surface was smooth once more. Alex and Vance didn't wait. They scrambled out of the turbine room just as the chanters fully revived, letting out a unified, guttural cry of frustration and rage. They raced through the tunnels, encountering Sergeant Riggs and the other officers cautiously descending the stairs. "What was that noise, Ryder?" The whole building shook. Riggs demanded, his face etched with terror. "Containment failure, Sergeant. We stopped the primary conduit. We need to seal this facility permanently," Alex said, grabbing the bolt cutters. "Riggs, get your men out. We need to breach the main water line and flood this entire level. Now." Riggs didn't argue. The terror in the silence was too palpable. 3 days later, the official story was a massive, critical infrastructure failure due to structural fatigue. The lowest level of the Cedar Creek Dam was permanently sealed and flooded with concrete, ostensibly to prevent total structural collapse. Alex and Vance were given commendations for extreme bravery and quick thinking, and were immediately transferred out of Cedar Creek. On their last day, they sat in their empty precinct office. Alex had the journal. "It's over, Alex." "We sealed it," Vance said, zipping up her suitcase. "We sealed the doors, Vance," Alex corrected, tapping the final entry of the journal. "But the journal says the keepers of quiet are a constant. They were sealed up in '74, but they came back. They live in the town. They're just people who know the truth." He paused, looking out at the normal, sunny street of Cedar Creek, the one they were leaving behind. "And there's one thing I can't shake, Vance. When the fourth door was active, when the origin almost broke through, I saw something in the lock. Not stars. Not space. Just the ultimate, cold, crushing darkness." He slid the journal into his bag. "I don't think the keepers were trying to open the door, Vance. I think they were trying to use the gatekeeper to stabilize it. They were trying to feed the origin power so that it would go back to sleep. And we just shut off its dinner." Vance swallowed hard, picking up her bag. "Let's just go, Alex." As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, a small, pale man in a tattered coat, looking remarkably like Elias, stood across the street. He didn't make eye contact, but he raised his hand and made a very slight, deliberate motion, a gentle shushing gesture, before turning and vanishing into the bustle of the waking town. Alex and Vance walked away, never looking